I still remember the weight of silence, not the comfortable kind that settles over a room like snow, but the crushing, suffocating silence that follows when you failed someone you love in front of everyone who mattered to them. My father's funeral, March 14th, 2019. I was 31 years old and I couldn't say his name out loud. The funeral director had placed the microphone on the lectern that morning, adjusting it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The chapel smelled like lilies and furniture polish. 67 people sat in those oak pews. I'd counted them while waiting for my turn to speak, a nervous habit, something to anchor myself to. My mother sat in the front row, her face a landscape of grief I couldn't bear to look at directly. My sister Emma had already spoken, her voice steady despite the tears, sharing stories about Dad's terrible jokes and his obsession with fixing things that weren't broken. The room had laughed, gently, the way people laugh at funerals when they're grateful for permission to feel something other than sadness. Then it was my turn. I was the oldest. I was supposed to go last, to bring it home, to say the things that mattered most. I'd written 7 pages. I'd practiced in my car, in the shower, lying awake at 3 in the morning. I knew every word. I stood up, walked to the front. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I gripped the edges of the lectern, and the wood was cool and smooth under my palms. I looked down at my notes. The words were there, exactly where I'd left them. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Not a sound. My throat had simply closed, like a door slamming shut from the inside. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The silence grew teeth. I could hear someone shifting in their seat, the creak of wood, a cough that someone tried to suppress. My vision started to tunnel. The edges of the room went dark and fuzzy, and all I could see was my mother's face turning toward me, confusion giving way to concern. I tried again, opened my mouth. Silence. My heart was hammering so hard I thought everyone could hear it, thought it might be the only sound I'd ever make again. Emma stood up and walked toward me. She didn't rush. She just came up beside me, took my elbow gently, and said, "It's okay, Danny. Let's sit down." And I did. I let her guide me back to my seat like a child, and someone else, my uncle, I think, went up and said a prayer or something. I don't remember. I sat there with my father's eulogy crumpled in my shaking hands, and I had never felt smaller in my entire life. The panic attack lasted another 40 minutes. Even after we left the chapel, even in the parking lot with the cold March wind hitting my face, my chest felt like someone was standing on it. Emma drove me home. She didn't say much. What was there to say? I'd had one job, to honor our father with words, and I'd catastrophically, publicly failed. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision that felt like survival. I would never put myself in that position again. Never. No more public speaking. No presentations at work. No toasts at weddings. No volunteer reading at the library like I used to do. I would find ways around it. I'd send emails instead of speaking at meetings. I'd decline to be best man at my friend Marcus's wedding. I'd build a life where my voice didn't matter in public spaces, where I was safe from that particular annihilation. And for 3 years, that's exactly what I did. I worked as a data analyst for a mid-size insurance company, a job that required almost no verbal communication. I was good at it. Numbers made sense. Spreadsheets didn't judge you. My manager, Patricia, was understanding when I asked to submit written reports instead of presenting at team meetings. "Whatever works for you, Danny," she'd said, though I could see the question in her eyes. I stopped going to my nephew's school plays. I made excuses at Thanksgiving when someone would inevitably ask me to say grace. I canceled my subscription to the local theater. I even stopped singing in the shower, as if my voice itself had become something dangerous, something that could betray me. Emma worried. She'd call every week, and sometimes she'd push. "You can't hide forever," she'd say. "Dad wouldn't have wanted this for you." But she didn't understand. She hadn't felt what I'd felt. That erasure, that absolute failure of the body to obey the mind. It wasn't about wanting or not wanting. It was about survival. Then came October of 2022, a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were inventory report days, and I was in the middle of reconciling third quarter claims when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. By that point in my life, I'd become someone who avoided most human contact that wasn't absolutely necessary. But something made me pick up. "Is this Daniel Morrison?" A woman's voice, older, tired but kind. Yes. My name is Ruth Pennington. I got your number from Emma, your sister. I hope that's all right. I'm in a difficult situation, and she thought you might be able to help. I had no idea what Emma had gotten me into, but I felt a spike of anxiety immediately. I'm not sure what kind of help you're looking for, but I need someone to speak at my husband's funeral, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the word funeral. This Friday. I know it's short notice. I know you don't know me. But Bill, my husband, he doesn't have anyone else. No children. His brother passed years ago. Our friends, most of them are gone or too ill to speak. And I can't do it myself. I've tried to write something, but every time I stand up, She trailed off. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman who couldn't speak at her husband's funeral, calling a man who couldn't speak at his father's. Mrs. Pennington, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm really not the right person. I don't do public speaking. I'm sorry for your loss, but Emma told me what happened at your father's service, Ruth said quietly. She told me you might say no, but she also said you were the most thoughtful person she knew, that you'd spent weeks working on that eulogy, that every word mattered to you, and I thought, maybe that's exactly the kind of person Bill deserves, someone who understands how much words matter, someone who knows how hard this is. I sat there in my cubicle, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not panic this time. Something else. Something that hurt in a different way. How many people? I asked. Small, maybe 10. Bill lived quietly, but he lived well. He was a woodworker, made furniture, beautiful pieces. He'd spend hours in his shop, and he'd talk to the wood while he worked, like it was listening. I used to tease him about it. Her voice softened. I just want someone to say that he mattered, that his life meant something. I can give you stories. I can tell you who he was. I just need someone else to say the words. I should have said no. Every rational part of me was screaming to say no. But instead, I heard myself say, when can we meet? We met that Wednesday at a diner near her house in Millbrook, a small town about 40 minutes from where I lived. Ruth Pennington was 71 years old, with silver hair she wore in a practical bun and hands that shook slightly when she poured sugar into her coffee. She'd brought a photo album. For 2 hours, she walked me through Bill's life. His childhood in rural Pennsylvania, his time in the Navy, how they'd met at a church social in 1973. She'd asked him to help move a piano, and he'd somehow gotten it up 3 flights of stairs by himself, stubborn as a mule. Their wedding in Ruth's parents' backyard, the miscarriages, 3 of them, and how they'd learned to be enough for each other. His woodworking, which had started as a hobby and became his whole world after he retired. The cherry wood headboard he'd made for their bed, carved with vines and birds. The way he'd hold her hand while they watched television, his thumb rubbing small circles on her wrist. I took notes, pages of them, and something strange happened while Ruth talked. I forgot to be afraid. I was too busy trying to capture Bill, to understand him, to find the through line of his 74 years. When Ruth mentioned that Bill used to leave her notes hidden around the house, little pieces of paper with terrible puns or drawings of cats. She loved cats, he tolerated them. I wrote that down. When she said he'd been scared of dying, scared of leaving her alone, but he'd made her promise not to spend the rest of her life sad, I wrote that down too. I'm going to try, I told her when we were done. I can't promise I won't freeze up, but I'll try. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her skin was paper thin and warm. That's all Bill ever asked of anyone. Just try. The funeral was Friday at 2 p.m. at Fletcher & Sons Funeral Home. I arrived an hour early with my notes printed out, 4 pages, double-spaced. My hands were already shaking. The chapel was smaller than the one from my father's funeral, maybe 15 rows instead of 25. 7 people showed up. Ruth, 3 elderly neighbors, a woman who'd worked with Bill at the lumberyard 30 years ago, and a young couple I never got the names of. The casket was simple pine, closed. There were flowers, white roses, and someone had placed one of Bill's wooden boxes on a table near the front, a small cherry wood thing with dovetail joints so perfect they looked like art. The funeral director, a man named Harold with kind eyes and a gentle voice, walked me through the order of service. There'd be a hymn, then me, then another hymn, then the committal. Simple. Take your time, Harold said. There's no rush, and if you need to stop, you stop. Nobody here is judging. But I would be judging. I knew that. If I failed again, I'd never forgive myself. Not for Ruth, not for Bill, not for my father. When it was time, I stood up, walked to the front. The microphone was there, same as before, waiting. I put my notes on the lectern, looked out at those 7 faces. Ruth was in the front row, hands folded in her lap, eyes already wet. I took a breath, opened my mouth, and I spoke. My name is Daniel Morrison, and I never met Bill Pennington. My voice sounded strange to me, too loud in the quiet room, but it was there. It was working. I never got to shake his hand or hear one of his terrible puns or see him in his workshop, talking to a piece of wood like it was an old friend. But I spent an evening listening to Ruth tell me about him, and I want to share what I learned. Because Bill's life mattered, and even though this room is small, even though there aren't many of us here, that doesn't make his life any less extraordinary. I told them about the piano, about the Navy, about the miscarriages, and the marriage that lasted 49 years. I told them about the notes Ruth would find tucked into her coat pockets, inside the coffee tin, under her pillow. I told them about the cherry wood headboard and how Bill had spent 6 months on it because he wanted Ruth to wake up every morning and see something beautiful. I told them he'd been scared at the end, but he'd made Ruth promise not to let his death define the rest of her life. He wanted her to keep laughing, I said. He wanted her to adopt another cat. He wanted her to remember that he'd been lucky, so damn lucky, to have loved her. My voice cracked on that last part. I had to stop and take a breath. And in that breath, I looked at Ruth, and she was crying. But she was also smiling, and she nodded at me. Keep going. None of us can know what happens after we die, I continued. But I think if love leaves an imprint on the world, then Bill Pennington is still here. He's in that headboard. He's in every piece of furniture he made with his hands. He's in Ruth's memory of his thumb rubbing circles on her wrist. He's in the fact that he tried, every single day of his life, he tried to make the people around him feel a little more loved, a little more seen. And that's not a small thing. That's everything, I finished. Folded my notes, walked back to my seat. My legs were shaking, but I'd done it. I'd spoken for Bill Pennington, a man I'd never met, and I hadn't failed. After the service, Ruth hugged me in the parking lot. She didn't say much, just thank you, and he would have liked you. But as I drove home, something had shifted. For 3 years, I'd believed my voice was broken, that I was broken, but maybe I'd just been using it for the wrong things. Maybe the key wasn't a big stage or a big audience. Maybe it was something smaller, more intimate, more human. A week later, Harold from the funeral home called me. Ruth gave me your number, he said. I have a situation. Family came to me. No one feels comfortable speaking. Similar to Bill's service. Would you consider it? I said yes. And then I said yes again and again. Over the next 2 years, I spoke at 63 funerals. Some were large, 100 people or more, but most were small. The forgotten ones, the lonely ones, the people whose families couldn't find the words or didn't have families left at all. I'd meet with whoever hired me, a widow, a daughter, a social worker from the county, and I'd spend hours gathering stories. I became an archaeologist of lives. I learned to ask the right questions. What did they love? What made them laugh? What were they afraid of? What did they leave behind? I learned that everyone, no matter how quiet their life seemed from the outside, had something worth saying. The 90-year-old woman who'd been a telephone operator for 50 years and had memorized the voices of everyone in town. The veteran who'd never talked about the war, but had kept every letter his mother sent him, tied with string. The teenager who died in a car accident and whose friends filled a notebook with memories for me to read, their handwriting shaky and young and devastating. I learned to hold grief without letting it drown me. I learned that sometimes people needed to hear that death wasn't fair, that it was okay to be angry, that love doesn't end just because a heart stops. I learned that my job wasn't to make people stop crying. It was to make them feel less alone in their crying. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid of my voice. It didn't happen all at once. There were still moments of panic. My heart would race, my throat would tighten, but I'd learned to breathe through it, to remember that I wasn't speaking for me. I was speaking for someone who couldn't. That took the pressure off, made it bearable. Last month, I spoke at a funeral for a man named Jerome Collins. He'd been a bus driver for 41 years. His daughter hired me because she was 7 months pregnant and couldn't trust herself not to break down completely. Jerome had driven the Route 12 bus, the one that went through the industrial part of town, picking up factory workers at 5:30 every morning. His daughter told me he knew everyone's name, knew their kids' names, knew who was struggling, who just got a promotion, who needed an extra minute to get on the bus because their knees weren't what they used to be. He made people feel seen, she said. In a job where you're supposed to be invisible, he made people feel seen. I told that story at his funeral, told about the Christmas he'd driven around the whole route on his day off, delivering homemade cookies his wife had baked. Told about the time he'd helped a woman having a panic attack, pulled the bus over, sat with her until she could breathe again, and didn't charge her the fare. Told about the retirement party where 200 people showed up, people he'd driven to work every day for decades, people who wanted to say thank you. Jerome's daughter came up to me afterwards, her belly round under her black dress, and she said, "You made my dad sound like a hero." "He was," I said. "He just did it quietly." She hugged me, and I felt her baby kick against my ribs. I think about my father a lot these days, about that eulogy I never got to give. I still have it, those 7 crumpled pages, in a folder in my desk. Sometimes I take it out and read it, and I realize now that I've been giving that eulogy over and over in different words for different people. Every time I stand up and say someone's life mattered, I'm saying it for him too. I'm saying the things I couldn't say when it counted most. Emma and I talk more now. She came with me to one of my funerals last year, sat in the back, and cried through the whole thing. Afterwards, she said, "You found your calling, Danny. Dad would be so proud." Maybe. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm not hiding anymore. I started singing in the shower again. I joined a community choir, just a small one, but still. I gave a presentation at work last quarter, and my hands only shook a little. I was best man at Marcus's wedding 2 months ago, and I gave a toast that made people laugh and cry, and I didn't freeze once. But the funerals are what matter most. Because when I stand up in those small chapels and funeral homes, when I look out at the faces of people drowning in grief, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm home. I'm doing the thing I was meant to do, giving voice to the voiceless, making sure that no life, no matter how quiet, goes unspoken for. Ruth still calls me sometimes. She adopted 2 cats, orange tabbies she named after characters from Bill's favorite TV show. She's doing okay. Some days are harder than others, but she's doing okay. And she always ends our conversations the same way. "Thank you for speaking for him, Daniel. Thank you for trying." I conquered my stage fright not by standing on a stage in front of thousands of people, but by standing in a small funeral home chapel with 7 people, speaking for a man I never met. And in doing so, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. A way to turn my greatest failure into something that mattered. A way to take all that silence and fill it with words that heal. Because in the end, that's all any of us want. To be remembered. To have our lives spoken out loud, even after we're gone. To know that we mattered to someone, that our story was worth telling. And now, that's what I do. I tell those stories. I speak for the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who leave this world without fanfare. I give them a voice. And in return, they gave me mine back. Oh, if this story touched something in you, a memory, a fear you've carried, a person you've lost, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to share it. Leave a comment about someone in your life whose story deserves to be told. And if this resonated, a like or subscribe means I can keep sharing these kinds of stories. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.